This is my Colorado Blue Spruce. I planted this about June 18 and I absolutely love the colour. There's loads of new growth coming on, but mainly at the top. I've noticed there's a bit less towards the bottom of the tree. But this plant is quite spiky. But I've noticed with the new growth, when it breaks out of its shell, it almost feels rubbery. It's got a gorgeous texture. Just absolutely love this tree, and it gives a fantastic contrast as it sits against the other plants in the garden. It's such a bright grey blue. I got a couple of really good surprises as well today. This is my Salvia Hot Lips, which I transplanted with my changing around in the borders a few weeks ago. I was a bit concerned because there was no growth on it, barely at all, even a week ago. I have fed it and now it seems to be coming through quite nicely. There's some good strong growth on here. This plant performed really well last year. It grew to about, I'd say, just under 1.5 meters. In fact, it looks like there might be just an odd little bud coming on here. Is there? Maybe that's a bud. I did consider splitting it, but because it's my first year transplanting and working with this plant, I didn't want to go wrecking it because it did so well last year. But I do actually think I'd like to put a couple more of these in the border and have them all together and just have a block of Salvia Hot Lips. It flowers for a really long period of time as well. This was my second surprise. This is my Bowls Mauve. And this performed well, and it actually flowered all through the winter. Although we did have a particularly mild winter this year. And it actually came to me. It was a 2-inch twig, and it was a customer of mine that passed it on to me, and she said, "Oh, I don't know how it'll do." And it grew quite large, and it just flowered and flowered constantly. And this was a transplant. I had it in another part of the garden and wanted to move it over here. And I thought that I'd killed it because within 24 hours of moving it, every leaf dropped off it, that it just seemed to die in hours. So I cut it back sort of halfway, fed it. It didn't seem to do anything, it didn't seem to improve. But then after a few more days, the growth has started to appear and the branches are turning. I can see quite a bit of green in there. So fingers crossed, I might get this back and it might perform well again this year. I have tried to take a couple of cuttings as well. So last year I bought quite a few pots of pinks and they all seem to have come back. I have nurtured them. I'm thinking I'll maybe use them in a pot this year. Here's a couple more, and these are coming back stronger than the other plants, and I may put some in the front garden as well. But yeah, for pots. This little lavender I purchased last year just for an autumnal pot, and I'm going to pop this in something this year and let this grow. It's quite a strong plant. I also have just behind here some campanula, and everyone says these are really easy to grow, but last year these plants really struggled. This one is particularly small and hasn't done so well. The one on the right looks like a much stronger plant really. But they hadn't been in the garden very long last year. The flowers were beautiful and then the slugs obliterated them. And I couldn't get them to recover. As fast as I was helping them, the slugs were attacking them again. It was a nightmare. So I've overwintered them. And I think I'm going to pop them in a pot on the patio this year. And hopefully they'll do quite well. It was such a shame because they were a beautiful plant when I first picked them up. Here's my azalea that I filmed 24 hours ago. And the buds are really starting to open up now. Such a lovely strong pink colour. This fuchsia has to be 8-9 years old. I had 2 in pots and we had severe winds, 6-7 years ago. and one was completely wrecked. They were both torn apart, and this one has been really slow at coming back. I planted it here last year and the growth just exploded. It got really large and absolutely covered in flowers. So I was really glad that I did that. So looking forward to seeing how big it gets this year. Isn't this plant the most beautiful colour? This is Pyrrhus Japonica. It was in a pot, but 2 years ago I transplanted it into the border to try and save it, because when it was in the pot it had been left for way too long. The compost hadn't been changed. There was just a couple of small clusters of leaves on the ends. I pruned it back as far as I dare because this plant holds very strong sentimental value to me. It's really important, and I was terrified of killing it off altogether. Last year there was a little bit of new growth, but this year there's absolutely oodles, and I'm loving this growth in the centre here. It turns quite salmony. The colour starts to change. When the light hits it, I think it makes the leaves look quite waxy as well. I'm just so thrilled that what I did seems to have saved it, and each year it seems to improve. So I've decided this year I'm not going to prune it again. I don't think there's any need. I like the shape that it's going. I'm just going to leave it, let it flourish and let it strengthen up as much as possible. Then maybe in a year or two I can give it a good prune back. Pyrrhus Japonica are acid-loving plants and they're really difficult to kill. This one had sat in its pot for around 20 years. So you tend to find if you overwater them, that's what kills them. They don't need a lot of water. I give this a mulch every single year in the spring of ericaceous compost. I give it a feed of seaweed and sequestered iron quite regularly, maybe 3-4 times through the year. And it seems to keep it happy, considering that I'm growing this in quite heavy clay soil. This plant grows maybe 6 to 8 feet high, 4 to 5 feet wide, but obviously this one's quite small because it was kept in a pot for so long. So it's going to be quite interesting over the next couple of years to see how this grows and flourishes now that I've taken it out of the pot. I'm going to try and take a couple of cuttings this year. My Lobelia that I purchased last year is coming through nicely. It's looking quite strong actually. I purchased one pot last year and I instantly split it when I got it home. It did okay, but the growth was a little bit weaker. But this year, well, I am so glad that I split it last year. I have maybe 6-7 plants in the cluster there, and 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 here. So it was worth it. I've transplanted it this year, and this area that I've put it in is much damper. I am also watering it a lot and keeping it damp. Lobelia Queen Victoria prefer damp ground. They're ideal at the side of ponds and things like that. My plan is to divide it this year as I'll get closer to the autumn, and I'm keeping this area here bare to make room for the Queen Victoria. So I'm hoping to fill this area with these plants. It's sitting at the side of my ceanothus, so the deep rich red sets off really nicely against that rich emerald green of the California lilac. Here are 3 red hot pokers that I planted in the end of February, and I kept them under a cloche because we've had high winds and it has been quite chilly. They've grown nicely, but very steadily, very slowly. So I'm hoping to put these in the ground maybe over the next couple of weeks. I'm going to plant them at the side of my other red hot pokers, and they'll sit between those and a lovely bright orangey yellow alstroemeria. So hopefully if these do well, that should look really good. Here is a genista that I purchased last year. It was the largest plant when I purchased it last year. And it was stunning. It had large branching stems and it was full of flower. Flowered all the way through the summer. The foliage was a kind of very small leaf, lime green. Absolutely beautiful. And ironically, I was so looking forward to this coming back this year. And there's no signs whatsoever, and I've tried everything. I can see when I look down here, it is quite green though, but the branches are very woody. I've cut it back, and now I'm just watching and waiting and hoping that it comes back into growth.